Welcome to Well Read, a program about a little bit of this and a little bit of that at your Ames Public Library. I'm Jerry Hyde, Youth Services Manager at your library, and I'm here today to begin a 6-month series regarding reading and the early literacy skills and practices that we need to have, or a child needs to have, what we had when we began to read in order to be successful at reading. Today, we're going to start right at the beginning. Reading in general. What are those little black things and sometimes colored things that are on that page that form together with letters and then form together the words and then form together the sentences and the paragraphs and the pages and the chapters and then finally the full book? What is that? What is it that we need to do that? With me today, I have our expert in reading. You will probably recognize her from being here in the Youth Services Department. She also does some story times for us, for you, and is my expert in reading, right?
Yeah, that's me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Jill, and let our audience see who you are.
I'm Jill Philby, and I'm a library assistant here at Ames Public Library. I have a background in education, and so I've always had an interest with children in reading, all the way through teens. I learned to read probably when I was in kindergarten, only because I was so afraid that I needed to know how to read before I got to school. So I have a very distinct memory of sitting on the front porch with my sister. She's older than I am, and her trying to help teach me to read so I would be comfortable going into kindergarten.
So is that a pleasant memory, or did you remember controversy or, that pushing you along?
I remember my mother saying, I made this all up in my brain. But it was a nice...
Technically we do,
yes.
Right?
But it was nice to sit with my sister Pam, and there's a photo of us sitting on the porch together, and that is a nice memory.
How awesome. So tell me a little bit about what she did to help you start that journey into reading.
She read to me. And that's really all it is. Read. When reading is probably the single most important thing you can do for a child to set them up for success in school. And so with Pam doing that and my mom and dad doing that, I was set up at a very young age. Reading is what brings every subject together, and it helps build empathy for other people. It expands your world. It enriches your vocabulary. So it is the most important thing you can do to be ready.
And because a baby can't read, so how would we go about having that baby learn how to read?
You're going to introduce the baby to books, and we have board books, and we have even board books that are somewhat chewable, and those
they're all chewable.
Well, that's true.
And terrible.
But those are great ways to introduce babies to books. Let them touch them, let them turn the pages by chunks, backwards, forwards, upside down, it doesn't matter, and let them taste them. That's one way they explore their world.
Okay, so you talked about upside down, forward, backwards. There is a terminology for that, print awareness. So tell me that's one of the early literacy skills of the 6 that is also important with learning the 6 practices. It enables us or empowers us to do those 6 practices. Tell me a little bit about what that means, print awareness.
Print awareness, there's kind of 2 different parts to it. There's environmental print awareness, and then there's what we think of here at the library with print awareness. Environmental print awareness is that you see text everywhere around you. The labels on a can of food, the signs out in the streets. Some parents even in schools also like to just put up the sign chair above the chair. That would be print awareness. You see it all around you, or environmental print awareness. Regular print awareness that we refer to is more when you look at a book. You're seeing the print on the page. You're making sure that the cover is on the front, or you're exposing the kids to say, this is the cover of my book.
Okay, so let's take an example here. One of my favorite books, of course, pretty much every book that I pull out is one of my favorite books, but so the doorbell rang. So tell me what would you do, and what do you do in your story time?
We introduce the book and we say the title, The Doorbell Rang. And I might take my finger and run along the bottom and say, The Doorbell Rang.
And why is that important?
It's just pointing out that these are symbols right here on the page. And when I say the word, it's identifying that the word is matched to the symbol. Or if I say the letter, that's what that letter is. And I might even say the sound with it a little bit. So like Pat, that's a very simple. This is Pat Hutchins, and she's the author who wrote the book. And so I might even say this is P-A-T and P-A-T. I might say the sounds along with it so we can get the phonetics on with it and push the word together, and we've got Pat.
So I know that children, especially preschool children, not so much toddlers, well, toddlers too, but they believe that we're reading the pictures and not those words. And so pointing those out like that is a very important part too. But those sounds, would you do that every time you would read a book?
No.
Yeah, or every book that you read?
No, and certainly not even every page or anything like that. It's just a few select times maybe throughout. If your child seems ready for it and open for it and maybe even looks a little bit curious or asks you about it, that's when you might bring something like that up.
So what happens if my child is holding their book upside down, or perhaps I'm holding the book upside down? What do you think would happen? Or is that part of print awareness?
That is part of print awareness, because you can't read when it's upside down. So
I can. Yeah, it's true.
So you might talk about how you have to have the book turned the other direction.
Like that?
No, keep turning.
Like that?
Like that.
Oh.
And then show how the book opens. Yeah, and how we read from left to right. So we would read the left page and then the right page, or no, opposite, because I'm looking opposite. But then we would start at the top of the page, go across, and go back and keep tracking, because learning how to track is another important skill that you'll do with print awareness.
So and then keep turning the pages, that our story grows and climaxes and all those wonderful things. But even within those pages, there's sometimes that we can do print awareness as far as the signs and things that are in our storybooks that are labeling the items that are in. So every time when the doorbell rings, or on the cupboard, there's lots of different things that you can find and or identify with that and with these little words. So one of the things that you talked about, the environmental awareness, when we're in the car driving down the road, and you may be the driver, but it's a great opportunity for us to talk about that print awareness and point out the signs, the street signs and that type of thing. Or even if you're the passenger, the adult passenger in the car, talking about those with your children in the back seat, all seatbelted in, and have conversations with them, talking about what they can see too. You shared your story about your sister. I can't remember that far back for me, but for my son, my oldest son, he could identify the Pepsi symbol, and that's what I always told my mom, that, look, he's reading, and she would go shake her head and like, no, Jerry, he is not reading, but he was, just not the reading that we read word for word.
Yeah.
Making that awareness, or being aware of what is around us and what symbols mean what. Because that's all letters are symbols that are on the page. So the skill of print awareness, how does that help us learn to read during those times? 0 to 5, what are we doing with that print awareness?
We're trying to take that print awareness and have them put those things all together. So they're being exposed to like the symbols, they're being exposed to the sounds, because you're reading aloud to them. And it all goes together to help them when they're ready to be in school.
So print awareness is also for our English as second language learners.
Yeah.
Another way, we always say that we read left to right, but not all languages do that.
True.
So print awareness is also what your child or what your home language is too, to share that way of reading left to right, up and down, back to front. I have to remember how to say that. So it isn't, we're making the assumption that we're all reading English,
True.
but it isn't necessarily all about English. It works for all languages. And I think that's important to note, that print awareness is part of the whole entire world and all of our children's experiences when they start to read. You also talked about, earlier you mentioned the bit about reading out loud and learning to read. And I kind of put those two things together because sometimes parents are coming in here and saying, I want to teach my child how to read, and do, what teachers are taught to do and have gone to school. So parents are their first teachers, but how do we work that in, and what kind of conversation should we have with our parents that are trying to teach their child how to read?
The best thing they can do is talk to their child and read. And so pick up a book and read the book, but also talk to your child while you're reading the book. And this is the dialogic reading that you're going to be doing. Ask questions throughout the book. You don't have to ask a question on every little detail, but you can ask questions to find out, does your child know that there's 10 cookies on that page? Can you count to 10? Can you count to 3? You can talk to them about the characters. This character, how does this picture in this book, how does this character look? Does this mean he was sad? Is he having a good day? Why do you think that's happening? What do you think might happen at the end of the book? How can we solve the problem? It's by talking to your child with the book that you find out that what is going on in his brain, and if he's absorbing what's going on in the book. And if he shows an interest then in learning a little bit more depth, you can go ahead and start with those letters. You don't need to push it. It will happen.
Yes, it definitely happens all on its
Yep.
own.
Yep. But you want them to enjoy it.
Right.
So you don't want to make every book that you pick up be a lesson in where you're pounding it into them. It will happen on its own, and you want it to be enjoyable.
So I think, and I firmly believe, that our parents are their first teachers, but they get to teach their child the love of reading and how to enjoy it, and to diversify the different types of reading, because we'll all be reading in school certain things so we can learn, or so they can learn. But this is that love of reading that you're teaching a child, and you do that not by forcing the sounds or forcing reading from page 1 to the end of the book, which I know a lot of parents, including myself, want to do that, because that's how I was raised. You read a book from the front page to the end. But in this dialogic reading, it's kind of child driven, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And if you notice halfway through the book, this is not an interesting book to your child, it's perfectly okay to abandon a book. You never have to finish a book.
That's right.
And we'll tell that to the older kids who come in too. If you don't like it, you don't have to finish it.
Well, and we as adults do that, right?
Right.
I mean, there are lots of library books, lots of books I have at my home even, that I start and then I put back up on the shelf or return to the library, because it is not something that I'm going to use my time to do that. But reading aloud, when I talk about adults reading, we typically read to ourselves, but reading aloud is especially important for even through high school. I mean, I still enjoy being read aloud too, because when I walk by the storytime room and stuff, I always like to stand there and listen to the story, because there's some magic when it comes reading it aloud. So tell me a little bit about your experiences and what that makes you feel like when you read aloud to the groups of children that you do.
Oh, I love reading aloud to them. They're so smart. They're just brilliant. And you don't know that. I mean, you know that, but when you're reading aloud to them, it really comes out. If you use a lot of expression when you read especially, the kids just really hone in on that book and in on that story, and they want to know what's going on with it. And then when you ask a question about it, they're all shouting out answers. And some of them, it's just amazing what they come up with. Some of them immediately know what the right answer is, and other ones just let their imaginations go. And you're like, wow, I never would have made that connection with this whatsoever. So it's so much fun, and it's a great way to expand their vocabulary too, because books have much richer language than what we do when we speak typically. So you can ask those questions about the vocabulary and see what they think it might be and help guide them toward what that word really means. And then those little brains start going off and you can just see their little brains working. And sometimes you get a question, oh, Miss Jill, what does that mean? What does that word mean? And I love that they're brave enough to ask, because so many adults wouldn't ask what that meant. They would just try to figure it out, but the kids will ask.
Well, there's two questions I want to ask that come to mind. You've mentioned questions several times, asking questions. There's special kind of, are they yes and no questions?
They can be. They can be. There's a sort of a main level of questions where you might ask, what is that man wearing on his head? And they can answer hat. Or does he have a monkey on on his leash? And they could say yes or no. And you might even say, to a picture that you see, and you know it's a dog, but you might say, oh, look at that kitty cat. And they'll go, oh, that's not a cat, that's a dog. And they have a lot of fun with those kinds of jokes. So it's very simple questions for level 1. Level 2, you get more into the connections. What have you ever had something like that happen to you? And let them think about that. Are they making connection with what's going on in the story, with who the character might be, with what the character's feeling? That kind of a thing. And then there's a higher level skill where you ask them more about how does this make you feel, and what do you learn from the story, if anything? What is the story about? You can have them repeat what the sequencing is, because patterning is so important in our language. So if you can get them to learn some patterns and to say, first this happened in the story, then what happened next? And they're very often, when they're younger, they'll skip over things, but then later on they'll come back. And when you repeat the story over and over, which you will, because they'll find a book that they love, that's one of those really important pre-reading skills. So they can tell you what the sequence is, they know what happens, and then they read the book that they have memorized.
And with reading also comes that learning of empathy and identifying with our characters. Now, we've talked a lot about doing a reading among a large group of children for story time and talking with our parents. But another thing that happens when you read with a child and it's just you and your child sitting on your lap or sitting next to you is that bonding experience that happens. And that reading helps us have that and take that time to be with our child and to share those types of feelings that we have. Reading should be an enjoyable time for you and for your child and children. So, sit down, relax, grab a chair, grab a book, and kind of just talk about the book and talk about the pictures if that's where you want to go. See what your child is interested in. But the best thing and the most important thing is that you have some time with your child that's a positive experience surrounding a book, so that child will become a lover of reading throughout their years. Thank you, Jill, and thank you. We'll see you next time, and happy reading.